I was
So fine, let's
really in
get
a mood
into
for it. Okay, I'll stop tomorrow. What time is your meeting with, well, your appointment with?
That's tomorrow.
Ladies and gentlemen, Denise is going to be a few minutes late, so we're going to wait for just a couple minutes for her. There it is. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. Would we please call the roll?
Member Mead?
Here.
Member Horland? Member Newton? Okay, thank you.
Okay, please stand so we can pledge. I pledge allegiance. Thank you all for being here. Thank you. Start with public comments. Richard?
Testing. Good morning, Chair and members of the subcommittee. My name is Richard Ramcharita from Southwest Ranches, and I'm speaking on behalf of Broward Clean Air. Our organization works to protect air quality, reduce waste, and advance sustainable practices throughout Broward County. I'd like to briefly address two critical agenda items. First one is agenda item A, commercial recycling compliance with, that's B actually, commercial recycling compliance within the program. Commercial recycling is already the law in Broward County, yet compliance remains inconsistent without meaningful enforcement, education, and accountability. The program cannot achieve its intended environmental or economic benefits. Stronger compliance ensures recoverable materials stay out of landfills, reduces unnecessary truck traffic and emissions, and creates fair conditions for businesses that are already doing the right thing. We urge the subcommittee to support clear standards, consistent enforcement, and measurable outcomes for commercial recycling. The second one is banning the direct haul of C&D materials to final disposal. Allowing construction and demolition debris to bypass recycling is not just a missed opportunity, it undermines our waste reduction goals and our commitment to a circular economy. C&D materials contain valuable recoverable resources. Recycling them reduces landfill pressure, lowers greenhouse gas emissions, and supports local jobs. Enforcing this ban is not optional. It is essential to protecting public health and maximizing environmental benefits. Broward Clean Air urges this subcommittee to take decisive action on both items. Supporting commercial recycling compliance and enforcing C&D recycling reflects a clear commitment to our environment, our communities, and our local economy. Thank you for your time, and I respectfully request that these comments be entered into the official meeting record. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Okay. Can we have a motion for approval of the last minutes meeting? Second, all in favor? Aye. Motion passes. Okay, Todd?
Moving right along here. We should be pretty efficient today with regards to the meeting. But first and foremost, we had the TAC meeting yesterday, and there was a presentation done by RRS with regards to the program that's being considered and worked on through the development of the C&D and its commercial recycling program. Today, we'd like to be able to go through that presentation here with the C&D subcommittee and the members to review what was reviewed yesterday with the TAC members and answer any questions, get any additional comments. As you saw in the packet, there was a number of comments that were turned in from the TAC members with regards to C&D. We did ask for additional comments going forward from the members that have already turned them in, their TAC members and others. So if there's any comments that anybody would like to be able to have us consider as part of the development of those programs, please get those to me. And we will make sure that they're part of the consideration. But right now, we'll turn it over to Travis Barnes from RRS.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Pleased to be with you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep.
All right. So, Todd, I'm assuming we're going to have the staff there in the room advance the slides like we did yesterday, if that's okay.
Yes.
All right, I'll go ahead and get going. So just as a refresher, my name is Travis Barnes. I'm a senior consultant with Resource Recycling Systems, also known as RRS, and we're part of the SES consultant team that has been assisting on the master plan. One of our primary tasks right now is working to develop the C&D ordinance. So I'm here to give a little update on that, as well as to shed some light on some of the policy decisions that will need to be made as part of this process, and really get your feedback today. Hopefully have a good discussion on that. So next slide, please. So as you all are keenly aware on this committee, C&D recycling really is one of those priorities that has been identified as a master plan, as well as from stakeholder engagement, as one of the more low-hanging fruits for us to pursue to increase the county's overall recycling rate and help achieve your sustainability goals. Within the state, the Department of Environmental Protection estimates that over 25% of Florida's waste stream is comprised of C&D materials. And that was also found to be true here locally. With the waste characterization study that was performed to help inform the master plan back in 2023, there was a visual audit done at the county's landfill, and it found that over 70% of the materials that were coming in to the facility could be recovered as C&D and recycled. So it just demonstrates that, you know, we're on the right path with developing an ordinance and tackling this portion of the waste stream. There's higher recyclability for some of the materials, particularly asphalt roofing, wood, brick, concrete, and other aggregates, as well as metals. And as our public speaker, public comment touched on, you know, recycling these materials really does conserve landfill capacity, supports the local economy, and furthers our overall sustainability goals. There's also been a lot of research done into the existing C&D processing facilities. You all have heard from them here at previous committee meetings that they stand willing and ready to accept additional capacity for these materials, and that they have the ability to process more through their existing private network of facilities already operating within the county. Next slide, please. So this is just a snapshot of the C&D portion of the waste stream from that waste characterization study. Not to go into too much detail on this, but just to demonstrate that there are significant portions of that waste stream that can be readily recovered with existing technology and the existing facilities that we have in place today within Broward County. Next slide, please. So the county does have legal authority to enact policies that can start to tackle this issue more directly. And counties in particular are given the authority to enact ordinances that can help direct the flow of C&D material. And actually, it's been on the books for quite some time that Florida has demonstrated that counties really should be tackling C&D and focusing on this, and that each county must implement a program for recycling, construction, demolition, debris. However, that has not been readily enforced by the state upon counties. The statutes do allow for development of ordinances to direct the flow of C&D to C&D facilities. You can't pick and choose which facilities they go to in regards to, you know, a single private entity or a single public facility, but you can direct that flow of material go to recycling process before it goes to disposal. So the ordinance that we're envisioning drafting for you all to provide your review would apply to residential and commercial construction and demolition, remodel projects that require a permit. And there will be policy decisions need to be made on, you know, which size projects trigger being under the ordinance, as well as if there's appropriate exemptions for, you know, smaller scale projects, or also emergency response situations when there might be an emergency demo needed. We don't want to make it, you know, overly burdensome for folks in those emergency situations. Next slide, please. There's also an existing regulatory framework under the state statutes for those C&D processing facilities that are operating. And annually, those facilities have to provide reports to the Department of Environmental Protection, not only on the amount of tons that they are receiving and they are recycling correctly, but they also have to look at the economic feasibility of recycling the materials that the state has identified, and report back to the state whether that is something that they can do with local market conditions. And there's an existing form used for compliance. So these facilities are in the habit of already performing some of this reporting, and the ordinance requirements that we're envisioning that I'll get into for facilities would add an additional layer of reporting to that, but we hope that it would not be overly cumbersome and would align with kind of what they are already doing in many ways. Next slide, please. So it's been discussed, the concept of, banning the direct haul of C&D from a construction or demolition project to disposal without first going to a processing facility to see what materials can be recovered. So we are working towards that and reviewing other communities in the U.S. that have taken similar approaches. The idea would be that you're supporting the routing of that material to one of those processors to reduce the overall volume of residue that then goes into disposal and to capture those recyclable materials back into the local economy. So at this point, we're envisioning that that would be a county ordinance that would be adopted and would be enforced at the county level. One approach could be that they only look at their county-owned landfill, or they could have an ordinance that addresses all disposal sites within the county. And obviously, that's a policy decision that we'll work on with them. Looking at just their facility is easier to implement in some ways, easier to enforce, but doesn't capture a significant portion of the waste stream. So I think we are leaning towards, recommending an ordinance that would cover all of the disposal sites. However, that would add an extra layer of enforcement on the county to look at the private sites and make sure they're in compliance with the ordinance. Next slide, please. So we're really looking at the overall recycling program for C&D to have two complementary ordinances. One would be the one I just described for the county to ban that direct haul of C&D materials originating from covered projects to the disposal sites to make sure that they're first processed through a facility. There would be a complementary ordinance that we're envisioning the county and each city would develop and adopt that would set recycling goals for specified projects with a fee imposed for non-compliance. So if there's a covered project, whether it's new construction or demolition, the thought is if they have to go through the permitting process, they would have a set recycling target for those projects based on the type of project and the size. And if they are not able to meet that recycling goal, then they have a fee imposed before they get their certificate of occupancy. So it's not a deposit program. There'd be less administrative oversight to just have a fee for non-compliance versus a deposit system. We're envisioning that each city would enforce their own ordinance as part of their internal permit review process, and that staff would verify whether the recycling goal was met for each project prior to issuing a certificate of occupancy. Again, we're envisioning a simple form that could be used to be added as part of the existing permit review process at the end of the project to verify the weights as to whether the material was successfully diverted to a recycling facility and recovered, or whether it was sent to disposal. And those projects that did not meet the goal would be assessed the new C&D waste fee. We are assuming that the fees would be collected by each of the respective cities, and those could be helped to fund the administrative costs and training for their staff. We're also envisioning that there be some exemptions put in place to not be overly burdensome for small projects and emergency response situations. And that'll be another one of those policy decisions where we're going to seek stakeholder input as to what's the appropriate level of exemptions. Next slide, please. So some of the core features of the ordinance that we're envisioning would be that fee-based system. So the fee would be tied to the final permit issuance, and there'd be no fee upon meeting the diversion requirements. And this would encourage compliance while also allowing an outlet for situations where the developer felt they couldn't meet the goal. There's still a way for them to proceed with their project, although we would like to see high compliance and obviously higher recycling rates. Next slide, please. Some of the other features that we need to discuss is that we need to think of this as two different goals, one being for the C&D facilities that are operating and one for those covered projects that are actually generating the waste. So a component of the ordinance would be that C&D facilities operating within the county would have to receive a third-party certification process to help demonstrate their overall recycling rate for their facility. We're envisioning that would be made publicly available and transparent so that the development community and construction community would know which facilities are achieving which recycling rates, and that way they have the ability to choose which facilities they choose to work with. There's also a separate component of that, which would be to set the recycling goals that are appropriate for each project. And so those are separate and distinct, whether there's a recycling target, a minimum recycling rate achieved at the facility level versus at the project level. And that's something that we'll get into a little bit more. Next slide, please. So for the facility certification, We're envisioning that it would only apply to those permitted facilities under FDEP regulation currently, and that those recycling rates be verified by a specialized third party. The Recycling Certification Institute is the primary organization that does go out and has a process in place and a protocol they use to verify the facility's performance. And so we're leaning towards working in that way, but there might be alternatives that we would need to look at. Some municipalities certify facilities themselves with their own municipal staff to determine the recycling rates by looking at the weight inbound and outbound at the facilities. So that is a policy option to look at whether this is something where you have that third party come in and do that, or you require the municipal staff to do that. And that's something that we need to look at, but we're leaning towards having the third party certification currently. All the facilities would meet that diversion and reporting standards so that there's transparency, everyone's having a level playing field in regards to the level of oversight they've got and the level of reporting they have to do. One of the key pieces of feedback that we received from the Recycling Certification Institute is that with starting a new program, we don't want to set that recycling rate bar too high to box out any of the existing C&D recycling facilities. The thought is that some recycling is better than no recycling, and you need to provide facilities an opportunity to improve their operations, improve their processes if they under the certification process have a lower recycling rate than they anticipated or didn't meet something as high as say 50%. We were cautioned directly to maybe not have 50% recycling rate recovery for C&D facilities initially, that might be too stringent to something to aspire to over time, and that could be potentially phased in initially up front in the language, or something that's a policy decision down the road where an ordinance could be amended to increase the overall goal and make it more stringent as the industry and the market adapts here locally. Next slide, please. So we are envisioning that, like I said, the local cities would enforce the project level oversight within their respective jurisdictions. And so our thought is to minimize the administrative burden on municipalities, try to make it as simple as possible to not disrupt their existing permitting process or add any delays to the construction or demolition process. Lee County is an example, as you all have been familiar with and went to go visit. They have a simple weight tracking certification form that they use where their staff at the end of the project just verifies the weight that was generated from the project and what portion of that was recycled successfully. The third-party verification process of the facilities provides really strong oversight and again a detailed methodology to make sure that all of those facilities are being held to the same standard and have consistency across all the various jurisdictions where they might operate, and provides that transparent reporting structure as well, which is why we're kind of leaning in that direction currently. Certification allows both the public and the private facilities to be on a level playing field, so it doesn't box out the opportunity for the Solid Waste Authority over the course of the planning horizon to potentially pursue their own C&D facility of some type, or to have the county have some type of C&D operation at their landfill. The certification process would apply to public and private facilities, so there's a level playing field there. Although I do again note that there is ample private C&D processing capacity currently within the county. It also encourages competition while ensuring there's standard and transparent data sharing, across the county. So again, if you are a developer or a contractor or someone doing the demolition work, you would know which facilities are achieving which recycling rates, and hopefully it would incentivize them not to just go to the one that might be the closest haul distance, but the one that can help maximize their recovery to make sure they meet their recycling target for their project. Next slide, please. In regards to the enforcement and compliance of the ordinances, for the project level, the fee would be tied to getting the final certificate of occupancy. So when you submit your final documentation after the project is completed, if you met the recycling goal, you're not assessed the fee. If you did not meet the goal and you're non-compliant, then a fee would be assessed. We are envisioning that there would need to be an appeals process that would be implemented at the city level and would align with their existing processes for appeals. And that would be something that each city would manage in their own way under their current processes. The penalties, we really want this to be something where There's a lot of education and outreach and bringing the industry and the community and the residents and commercial businesses along with this process and where we're headed with increasing recycling across the county. So we're not envisioning strong penalties. However, if there's falsified records or willful noncompliance, repeatedly, improper disposal, legal dumping, those types of things, there would be some code enforcement issues that would apply and would be, ratchet up along with the existing city code enforcement violations processes. And then again, there would be some exemptions and waivers provided. That way we're not being overly burdensome and not driving up the cost of, say, affordable housing and things like that for maybe really small projects or single family homes. So those are things that we'll have to consider and will be policy decisions we look forward to get your input on. Next slide, please. As we mentioned, Lee County is a model in Florida that we're strongly looking at. They have a similar process in place where a final fee is assessed if there's non-compliance at the end of their project. They do require facilities to be certified, although county staff are the ones verifying the facility's recycling rates with the data that the facilities provide the county staff directly, which is different than the third-party certification that we're considering. The staff have reported high compliance there, very low administrative effort, and a strong increase in their recycling rates. I believe before the ordinance, they're around 39% C&D recycling, and now they're well over 90%. And again, it's become part of their process, but again, their system has been in place for many years. We understand anything new within Broward County will involve a lot more stakeholder engagement, as well as with municipal staff, making sure everyone's enforcing the ordinance as consistent as possible across their jurisdictions, and that everyone is kind of aware of where we're going and have that information. So we were happy to speak with the TAC yesterday to really get their input on some of those issues and to engage with them, and looking forward to doing so more so in the future. Next slide, please. So for you all here, this is a snapshot of some of the key policy decisions that we're going to be wanting your input on. Right now, I would like, after this presentation, just a couple of slides left, to really get into some of these details with you a little bit more so. But we also understand, the devil's in the details with the draft that we actually provide, and that you need to see a written draft to really get into the specifics of things. And we're working towards providing that by January 23rd is our target date, to have something that then you can actually start to shop around and redline and get into this in a more detailed way. But one of the key decisions is, do we utilize that third-party organization to certify the performance of the C&D facilities, or is that something that municipal staff would be tasked with doing? And there's pros and cons and trade-offs with each of those approaches. The other would be, to what account, we had to hold the facilities accountable for the targeted materials versus we can look at these facilities' performance as either their overall recycling rate, or we could also look at what portion of targeted materials remain in their residue after it's been run through their system. And those are distinct and important distinctions. The thought is, in talking to the Recycling Certification Institute, that each of the facilities have different capacity, they have different processing equipment in place. They're receiving potentially different feedstocks based on where they're geographically located within the county. And initially, we shouldn't develop a targeted recycling rate that is overly burdensome, that again boxes them out of the system without giving them an opportunity to improve. One way to look at that is to look at the targeted list of materials that we would specify in the ordinance. Again, those were like the brick, the aggregate, clean wood that we discussed, metals, some other materials like that. How much of that material remains in their residue after running through their plant? Because that's a key indicator of how well their facility is performing, and doesn't necessarily hold it against them if they had more, say, garbage in on the front end, on the inbound of their materials, say more commingled loads or something like that coming in. So that is one approach that we're looking at that was recommended, and that'll be a policy decision that we'll need to look at. Another would be determining the appropriate recycling rate and goals for C&D projects. So again, at the local construction and demolition level, what is the appropriate recycling goal for those, so that we're achieving the county and the Solid Waste Authority's vision of increasing recycling without being overly burdensome or overly costly. The other would be what's the appropriate fees for noncompliance. We have heard from some jurisdictions that if the fees are too low, it just becomes a cost of doing business, and the market basically responds and passes that on to their customers without really seeking to comply with the ordinance. And in those jurisdictions, they've either increased the enforcement or increased the penalty or the fee for noncompliance. So we want to set a rate that does incentivize the market while also not increasing costs too much or being overly burdensome. And then determining the appropriate level of exemptions, like we talked about, what should be exempt to make sure that, it's appropriate, but at the same time, we are looking to make sure that we increase recycling. So we can't have broad exemptions that undermine the overall intent of the policy. Next slide, please. So our proposed timeline, as you all know, is very aggressive. We're in the process of developing that draft ordinance currently based on our research and stakeholder input, and we hope to have a draft available initially by January 23rd. We understand that that will have to then go through our process of not only their committee review and executive committee review and TAC review, but also get feedback from the municipalities, essentially their building departments, permitting departments, and their other municipal staff. And then they'll go through the process of adopting it. So based on the way the ordinance is structured and where we land on that, each city will have to go through their process. And we understand that in some ways the timeline kind of gets out of our control, but we've been directed to be as efficient and fast as we can. And so that's the way that we're headed. We also understand that there'll need to be robust education and outreach, and we stand ready to assist with helping develop those training materials and outreach materials, not only for the industry, but for municipal staff, as well as our homeowners and business owners that are the clients of those contractors that will be seeking to either do construction or demolition work. Next slide. And so for the final slide, our next steps, to continue to engage with stakeholders such as yourself. We're going to refine that ordinance language based on the feedback that we get from you all after we share the draft. We'll define that certification process and then develop those outreach and education materials after decisions have been made so that we can start to move towards implementation. And with that, I appreciate your time today. I'm happy to be here for the rest of the meeting for a dialogue and any questions you might have.
I appreciate your input, Travis. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
One of the things that I picked up on was the third-party certification. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? What are your thoughts there?
Yes, sir. So the way that looks is each of the permitted facilities that would be regulated under a new ordinance would have to go through the certification process. Obviously, there is a time commitment and a cost associated with that. So we're looking into, what is that additional burden on those facilities? My understanding is they have that third party actually come in, observe their operations, verify and document the amount of material that they're receiving over a certain amount of time and their recovery rate for those materials. Again, that could be looked at where it's a overall recycling rate as a portion of what percent is recovered from their inbound material, or we could set it up where there's a target on the amount of those covered materials that end up still in the residue. And then after that, there's an annual certification process. I'd have to go back and look, but I think once you get certified, you have to at least have the third party come through every other year, if I'm not mistaken, to look at that. And so that'll be, how that would work under the Recycling Certification Institute's program, at least. We've met with their executive director to get a little feedback on that, and he's got some other information that we're waiting to receive from him. I've also got some meetings scheduled with him at the Construction and Demolition Recycling Association conference coming up later this month as well.
Okay, thank you. Because
Yes, sir.
I don't want to get too many layers here between the goal and what we're trying to do. So I'm a little concerned about some of this. Have you considered, or do you think it would be worth considering a phased-in approach, perhaps something to do with the amount of, or the percentage that we would expect to be churned out by the processing facility over time, rather than go straight from where we are right now to a 70% goal, which we would consider to be entirely reachable, but maybe not in one jump? What are your thoughts there?
Yes, sir. I think we've talked about it before that we've got to crawl before we walk, but before we run. And so we don't want to put forth an ordinance that's too stringent that again boxes out existing C&D facilities from participating in the future market and in the recycling ordinance that we have. We were directly cautioned by the Recycling Certification Institute that even a 50% recovery or recycling rate at facilities might be too stringent at first, particularly if you're requiring that third-party verification and they go in and really look at every single thing that they're doing. The thought would be that some recycling is better than no recycling, and to give those facilities an opportunity to improve their operations if for some reason it is found that they're not meeting as high of a recycling target as maybe they thought they were. And so we agree there needs to be some phased in approaches to setting that target, and there's a variety of ways that we can look to do that.
Okay, thank you. Are there questions for the dais?
Yeah. Hi, Travis. Member Horland here. I'm going to take a breath because we have stated here and also at the SWA meetings that, we want to ensure that this C&D ordinance gets done. I think that we all felt, you've heard Chair Ryan say that it was low hanging fruit, but there are so many components to ensuring that this not only works, but is not an undue burden on the municipalities and also on the applicants. We're seeing increased each year with each legislative session, we're seeing increased a number of bills proposed that preempt local control. And a lot of that is directed at our building department and permitting process. So, I'm very concerned about anything that we do to further delay that process. So it is really of the utmost importance that it is efficient and that we're not putting an undue burden on staff. Along those lines, as you know, we are facing tax on our ad valorem tax base. There are many proposals out there. My feeling is that there will be something that will be coming our way. There may be a few things coming our way, but at some point we're going to be looking at reduced income for the city. So, that goes to the cost of implementing the program. You've mentioned about keeping that cost recovery, keeping it cost neutral for the cities. There are a lot of issues that we need to address. And I'm sitting here with nearly 5 pages of excellent comments from TAC. What I'd like to see, which would be helpful for me, and then when I say take a breath, maybe we need to take a step back from that aggressive January 23rd date, and I'm okay with that as long as we get this right. But the comments that I'm looking at that came in from the TAC, and I'll beat that drum one more time. I know it's a dead horse, but I've said many times that I thought TAC should have been engaged much earlier. It was important that we let the consultant do their job, but we needed to bring in the people that are tasked with implementing this and really have the day-to-day knowledge in our municipalities. But what I'd like to see is these comments that I'm looking at are reflective of the conversations I've had with my own staff and staff at other municipalities. I almost like to see a line-by-line answer to a lot of these questions. I think that would be helpful. However, you can do that in an efficient way, whether that's you working with Todd and Daniel, but I think a lot of these things, starting with the first one, which is Broward County must amend the current Broward County disposal service agreement to include other vendors. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So that is key. So what are your plans coming off of that TAC meeting yesterday and looking at these comments to be able to get some information back to us?
Yeah, so I'll start and say I completely agree with you. And just as a reminder, for those that maybe haven't met me before, my background is all with city and local governments prior to joining RS just a year ago. So I think the way that the TAC thinks as well, and we're hypersensitive to what's the impact going to be on the municipalities, not only on their staff time, but also their training efforts and their budgets. So that's something that's at the forefront of how we're developing these. What we committed to the TAC yesterday and with Todd, and we've already developed a comment tracker. So similar to what we did with the master plan development, we're going to have a spreadsheet where we're tracking all of those comments that come in from the TAC or others, the date they came in, which jurisdiction they came in and from who, and then how we responded. I think at this point, we don't have clear answers on all of those questions that are raised as to exactly what will be in the ordinance until we have something that we propose to you all. So I think in terms of responding, we have responded to some of the municipalities, but others I think we're going to have to take their thought into consideration in terms of how we draft the ordinance. And then once we have something in place that we can share with you all, we'll get into that process of addressing how they impact those comments and the concerns that were addressed. I was pleased to hear with you that you recognize that the timeline is very tight. So I think that on our end, we need to stay as focused as we can on the consultant team to provide a deliverable to you, knowing that it's not going to be perfect. It's a starting point that we then go through that iterative process with yourself, this committee, and the TAC to really land where it needs to be. And without having something specific, and we're just talking about these ideas kind of at a high level, it's harder to get down to the nitty gritty as to exactly what would be there. What is an appropriate exemption? Exactly how would it be enforced at the local level? And so that's our intent, is to provide something that can start that direct discussion on point by point that would help then inform some of those questions that we receive from some of the municipalities. We also asked the TAC to continue providing us that feedback. So I think we've received comments from maybe 3 or 4 jurisdictions to date. And obviously there's a lot more cities. We'd love to see additional feedback like that. It's very helpful to make sure that we're thinking through and being thoughtful on how we develop everything. But to your point, we're going to track all of those comments. We do anticipate responding line by line to each of them. I think we need to at least have a draft ordinance in place that then we can use to respond to those first, though, because otherwise it could be, a couple of different answers based on the options that are decided upon. Some of those same policy decisions that we discussed on those slides that I had.
Thank you
Does
for
that make
that.
sense?
And no, it absolutely does. And I understand. And I know we've all been trying to make decisions and we don't have a concrete document to take a look at so we can respond to some of that. So I understand that. What I would ask for you, and I hope that Member Mead would concur, that if at any time you feel that, hey, this deadline is too tight, just slow down, come back to us and say, you know what, listen, we're going to need a little more time to really get down into the details of some of these things. So while we've heard from TAC, we've heard from the industry, we had requested, and I know that Todd is reaching out. We need to hear also from the building community. I think that's going to be an important component of that so that we have everybody at the table. I feel that, the ball is rolling downhill and we want to get to our end point. But at some point we need to put the brakes on to make sure that all of these comments and all of these stakeholders are a part of the process while we're sitting up here making policy decisions. Okay, thank you.
I would just say I absolutely agree with you on that. And I appreciate you providing us, the consultant team, the grace to potentially need more time. That said, I think, we're putting forth the best effort we can to have something there. In our mind, having a draft with the understanding that it is not going to be perfect, but a starting point for decision making and discussions is what's key. And so that's our intent, is to have something. I think everyone will be more comfortable knowing that it won't be perfect, but a good starting point that we can then build upon it to improve it, to make sure it meets everyone's need. And again, isn't overly burdensome for any particular stakeholder and still achieves our goal.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Member Holden. Good points. And I would concur that we need to hopefully get the document to us as soon as possible, recognizing that there's going to be amendments, there's going to be changes. It's inevitable. The sooner we can get some of these items addressed, like you mentioned in the comments that had been given by some of the cities, some of them are very germane. I read a couple of them; they were very germane. The better. I hope that they'll put you in a good position to make any adjustments and amendments you need. Any other comments from the dais? Okay, Todd?
No, we're good.
Okay. Okay, Travis, thank you very much. I guess we're done with you. Where are we going?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
I think that covers everything with regards to C&D recycling program. Let me just make sure here with TAC comments. And just one other thing with regards to the programs. We are looking at a mixed C&D program, not a source separated program. I know there was a couple of the comments that said there's not enough space at these construction sites for numerous containers, et cetera. Each site would be site specific to the individual doing the project if they felt as though they could do the source separation on site. they're more than able to do that. But this program would also be looking at more of a mixed C&D program, and hence the reason for the certification process is at these C&D processors to make sure that these mixed loads are effectively sorted, materials are recovered, and try to minimize the residual fractions. Let's see, and we are working on with regards to talk to legal with regards to understanding the disposal ILA and options that need to be addressed, or items that need to be addressed as part of that are in the disposal ILA, to make sure that we can move forward appropriately with recovering these material streams. We'll have that at future meetings.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Todd. All right, next, we'll hear some commercial recycling program.
Sure. Thank you, Chair, Vice Chair, Executive Director, and Counsel. Daniel Deitch with SCS Engineers, part of the SCS engineering team working on this. So first, I want to thank Travis for his presentation, his work, and the feedback that we've received from various stakeholders. On a parallel path, we're moving forward with developing the framework for a mandatory commercial recycling ordinance. Unlike the C&D, where there was a specific white paper that was developed as part of the master planning process, we are preparing a fact sheet that presents the statutory authority, the justification. Why are we focused on this in terms of waste composition? And we've identified several programs in Florida that serve as great examples that we will be relying on. Miami-Dade County, Lee County, City of Orlando, I think Orange County, Gainesville, Alachua County, Collier County, and even the City of Hollywood. So that will be presented to Todd in draft form. It'll likely be distributed to the Governing Board Executive Committee, TAC, as well as this subcommittee. So be on the lookout for that. On a parallel path, we have started drafting in ordinance. Just as you mentioned, it's often helpful to see something in black and white, something to react to. But similarly, there'll be a lot of policy directions, policy guidance that we'll be seeking from you, because we know, based on past experience in these other jurisdictions, that there are challenges that need to be worked through. And it's not just the building department, it's the planning department as well. As you can imagine, parking spaces I'm sure you deal with it regularly within your jurisdictions. But we want to strike the balance, because we know that there's opportunity to utilize the waste stream components generated by commercial entities. And again, we want to strike that balance of the not so invisible hand of government, encouraging folks, their businesses to do the right thing, but also recognize that we've got to follow that same process. We want to walk before we run, because this is new for many jurisdictions. So similarly, we are driving forward because this is what we've committed to, but we will follow your lead in terms of adjusting the pace so that we're not heading into a crisis of our own creation. But we do see this as the proverbial low-hanging fruit, and we want to move deliberately forward. So most likely at the next meeting, we will, just like what was done with the C&D, we'll have a presentation for you that sort of walks you through, the highlights from the fact sheet and identifies the elements of the proposed legislation.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. There's a couple of concerns that I have with the recycling process. One of them is space, obviously. If we're going to do the multi-stream or dual stream, I think we can eliminate probably single stream for most of the buildings. And I'm just a little concerned, because we're going to have a lot of plastic bags that are going to be encompassing the trash. And I don't know how we're going to work through some of these things. So I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
So there's a couple components to it. One is we've been talking for a long time now about a robust education and outreach program that it's really boots on the ground, right?
Yeah.
You need to have conversation with the waste generators so that they understand why they're being asked to do to perhaps manage the waste differently. There has to be a compliance component as well. So we hear your concern, but really at the end of the day, we're talking about a volume of waste that's being generated at a commercial establishment. A portion of it is recyclable. If they are not currently recycling, the volume remains the same. It's just being put into different containers. Where the challenge is for businesses that have enclosures, because there are physical constraints, and the idea is not to have businesses that are adversely impacted tear down their enclosures and rebuild them to account for recycling. But we've got a lot of examples from other jurisdictions of how they have managed that, and we will make sure that we present those options.
Yeah, because that's going to impact parking and a few other things too. So it's a major consideration, I think.
Yeah, and it's not uncommon, right? This is we have the built environment, and now we're talking about imposing a new requirement that wasn't contemplated at the time that businesses were constructed or
Exactly. And I'm sorry, when will you have something available for us to look at on this?
We plan to get the fact sheet to you within the next week, or at least we'll be submitting it to the executive director. And we can also share with you at that time the draft ordinance. That is not a final, nowhere close to a final product, but at least we'll present the contours of what we believe are the best practices from other jurisdictions.
Okay. And you have precedents for this, I assume, from Lee County or other areas that have done this. All right, cool. Thank you.
I think with regards to the review, I think, and Daniel, you mentioned them, I think there's actually it's specific to Florida, other areas that already have enacted commercial recycling, C&D recycling. And those will be the ones that are part of SCS's review for the commercial program, very specific here to Florida.
Yeah, we're fortunate. I mean, there are examples from around the country, but a general approach is look at best practices as broadly as possible. However, there are at least 10 programs already in existence in Florida, including one within Broward County.
Okay. Are there any other comments or questions in the dais? Comments, questions from the audience? Okay, thank you. Do we have anything else, Todd? Do we have anything else there? Okay, then we'll accept the motion to adjourn. Okay, motion made, approved. Thank you.
And just a reminder, Friday's meeting is Executive Committee and Governing Board to review the facilities amendment and the financial modeling. That'll take up most of the time.
This commercial